Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have another special guest from Oklahoma. And before we introduce our guest, we actually want to introduce our co-host, Corinne French.
Hello, so glad to be here today. Can't wait to get started.
Absolutely. And before we introduce our guest, we do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's given hundreds of millions of dollars away to public education. So if your district needs unrestricted funds, reach out to Ideal Impact. Okay, for today's podcast, we have Superintendent Miller from Bixby Public School. Superintendent Miller, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Gary and Corinne. I appreciate being here. This is my 32nd year in public education, following 10 years as an artillery officer in the Marine Corps, which was great training for being a middle school teacher, which is how I started my career. I spent 9 years as a middle school teacher and then 13 years as a middle school principal. 3 years as an assistant superintendent, and now the last 6 years as a superintendent here in Bixby, Oklahoma. We're a district of about 8,100 students, a very fast growing district, grown about 2,000 students since I've been here. So we are building as quickly as we possibly can, adding classrooms, adding athletic facilities. It's a great time to be a Spartan, as we say around here, because there are a lot of positive things going on. So it's a joy to be a superintendent, and I'm happy to be part of this conversation today.
Yes, excited to have you.
I was going to say that might be
Yeah.
a great introduction. One of my sons was in the military, and I love that you mentioned that. Thank you for your service. And that was such a great introduction. I'm like so excited to get started.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Thank
I
you.
think we may have a little bit of a delay. So if you're listening in, I apologize if there's a little bit of a delay there. Um, absolutely, I think you're one of you may be the only guest, at least one of the few, that has a strong military background. So very interesting. So each of our guests has a unique background. So it's amazing, and you got the perfect mascot, the Spartans, right? And
There we go. Absolutely. Perfect.
very cool. And my family has a history of people from the military. My dad was stationed at 8th and I in the Marine Corps, so I have a lot of appreciation for the Marine Corps. Um, okay, so let's kick things off. So now everybody's gotten to know you a little bit, got to know your background. So a lot of, and by the way, those listening in, we are sharing the good things happening in public education. There's a lot of really good things happening, and so Superintendent Miller, if you can share kind of what you're passionate about, or maybe some challenges or ideas that you've been focused on in public ed.
Well, it sounds a little trite when I say this, but really I'm focused on doing everything we can to serve the students that we have. And so when I first came to Bixby, we made an intentional pivot away from a over focus on test-based accountability in preparing kids for those annual tests, and more towards what are the qualities or attributes that a student needs to have when they graduate to be successful in the 21st century. And to me, that's the burning issue right now that there doesn't seem to be enough urgency about is what does it mean to be an educated person in the 21st century, and how do schools need to evolve to ensure that we're meeting that model, and that when kids, when they walk across the stage and they go enter their lives, whatever that they choose to do, that we have given them as much knowledge, but at the same time, as many skills and mindsets that they need to be successful as they move forward.
I
Absolutely.
love I love that. It doesn't sound trite or cliche at all, because we to focus on students versus what they can achieve and their test scores is
Mhm.
it's an important focus. And I appreciate that you said it was an intentional shift, and you'll pivoted. I do think it's strange. Years ago, someone told me you're gonna be educating students today. The average second grader is gonna have a job that we don't even know how to explain. And that is so true. And that just keeps happening over and over at such a fast rate. They are going to have jobs that we won't even be able to explain. How do we do that? Or what are some things that y'all are doing to prepare them for something we can't even explain?
Well, what we've done here in Bixby is we came down to 6 learner attributes, and obviously you can have an extensive list, but we narrowed it down to 6. The one that we're really focusing on now with our teachers and administrators is this idea of student agency. And what does it mean to give students more autonomy in their learning? Because the truth is students can learn all the time. They have access to resources outside of the classroom where they can pursue knowledge in a wide variety of things. So we need to help them have the mindset of they're going to be lifelong learners because the world is going to be changing so quickly that they will constantly have to be on that path. Then we really want to continue to foster curiosity and make sure that they're asking questions and they're curious about the world around them. And with that, that they have the ability to discern good knowledge from bad. So that critical thinking and problem solving that come with that. And then certainly the idea of being a good citizen is always going to be part of that, that they understand their role in society, the importance of being an active member in our republic and in government, in civic organizations, in faith-based organizations, that uh, there's in order to be a good productive citizen, there's more to it. So we think that if we really focus on all of those things, critical thinking, problem solving, curiosity, student agency, and teach teamwork and all of the elements that go with that, communication skills. And obviously, we're still going to embed the content standards because those are still important, but in a way that's meaningful that they can build upon. And so it is just more of a mindset of how do teachers facilitate learning in their classrooms where the 25 kids may be working on things that are different based on, but the standard is still the same, but they're kind of working in different ways. So that's a very quick explanation, but really trying to transition from the teacher in the front teaching content because again the technology that we have already has all that, and so how do we make sure that students not just have the ability to acquire knowledge but know how to use it. Very interesting stuff obviously with AI, and there's a lot of conversation about that, and it's a little frightening and exciting at the same time to see how that's going to transform education over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting. That's your focus is. I don't think we've heard anybody that had a focus like that. So I think it's amazing. I think it's great. So we talk to different superintendents, and sometimes there's a focus on more of the softer skills, right? So character development, that sort of thing. And then of course sometimes there's a focus more on the traditional elements of um, just purely academics. Sometimes there's a focus on having which is kind of unique. There's a focus on having a how do you apply the what you learn in school directly to like a career development, career readiness center, that sort of thing. And I really like, to your approach, kind of, it is actually a missing piece in a lot of these, I think, is that critical learning how to critically think, right? Just in general, how to take all that information and use it in a way that's effective. And so I think that's very interesting. Any other thoughts around that, Superintendent Miller?
Well, I see that with my own grandkids. It's just obviously we're going to continue to teach kids to read and do math and science and history and those elements, but uh, things like the Carnegie units or seat time need to be rethought. The idea of grade levels rather than ability levels needs to be rethought. And I'm not saying we just throw everything out and start over again, but we need to be more innovative and creative in how that instructional model looks, because AI is going to give us the ability very soon, and in some ways already, of individualizing instruction for kids. So if I've got a classroom of 25 students and I've got one child who's doing math at a sixth grade level and one doing math at a third grade level, how can I do that effectively and efficiently using AI to help provide that additional instruction. So those are the things that our teachers are going to have to grapple with. So when we talk about critical thinking and problem solving, it's going to start with us. We're going to have to figure out how to use these new technologies in a way that makes learning better for kids.
I love that. But early on, we're going, I think, on our third year of podcasting. And so we were started during a time when we needed this technology to stay connected, and schools were going through so many changes. And now here we are still, we're back, everyone's back in person, but leaning on different technologies and learning from them and taking the good. And I think this is exciting conversation about AI. And I am definitely, in some ways, I would say somewhat afraid of it, because, and I think it's because I had a typewriter in high school and college. And so it really is everything about technology has been so new to me. But I think something that you said, I want you to dive in a little deeper with, about being curious and then the content that they're receiving. How can we teach them to be critical, know that content is all there, not all of it is good, not all of it is true, to be curious? And what are some success stories? Do you have some success stories with that, or some way to encourage others to maybe not be so afraid of this? If there are some superintendents or some board members listening, maybe to like some success stories of how to go into this conversation in this space and do it with the fidelity.
Well, let me give you two quick examples. One is happening here in our district. We are expanding our robotics program, and it's offered as a class within our STEM curriculum at the middle school, but the competitions are just amazing. We had one that we hosted at our middle school with 65 teams from across the state. And to watch those kids working in teams, trying to solve problems together and working together, critically thinking about, okay, if we do this, then that happens. If we do this, then something else happens. They were fully engaged. And so how do we replicate that in a regular classroom? In this case, they're working on robotics. It's a well-defined, here's how you earn points, here's how you win. So how do we then take our content standards and build around that the opportunities for students to be creative about how they demonstrate mastery of that standard, and how they, I guess, learn that. So there may be multiple methods that a child may desire to learn that. Another example I just saw a couple weeks ago at the National AASA conference in San Diego. We visited an elementary school there that is the first trilingual immersion program. So they teach Spanish, English, and coding and AI starting from pre-K. And so it is a very ambitious thing, but to watch those young children working with AI, I watched a first grader who was teaching his AI bot math. So he was putting in problems. If the AI bot didn't know the answer, it would say, I don't know the answer. The student would teach it. And then that AI then acquires the knowledge then to be able to come back and help the student at some other point. So they're almost working together towards this, but the student was much more engaged because he's got this AI bot that he can dress up, he can change the appearance, he can do some things that are just kind of fun and quirky. But at the same time, it is a tool that is exposing that child to, how do I ask questions? How can I be the prompt engineer is a new career field, going back to what you were talking about. Some of those people are going to make good income because they are people who can talk to AI, talk to technology, and get it to do the things that we as humans want it to do. And those are happening now. So we've got to really be able to be curious and creative ourselves. I keep reinforcing that. As adults, we can't afford to just say, well, this is the way I learned it 20 years ago. because that
Mhm.
doesn't help our kids today learn the way that they're going to need to be ready for their jobs in the future.
I love that. I think one thing that for our listeners to realize is that you by going to that district and seeing that, it's undeniable. You got to see the joy of that student in that moment. So it's undeniable. Like if I just tell you this is happening in that school district, it's almost like when someone told me that when you go to Alaska, it's bright out. You're like, oh, okay, it's bright, it's bright.
Yeah.
Went to Alaska and I was like, it's 9 o'clock and it looks like it's 5 in the afternoon. Undeniable. And so I think seeing it sometimes and talking about it is really important. So I commend you for going, and your district for supporting you to go to conferences like that. I think that's really important. And so that really watching what's happening, it's easier then for us to go back and tell someone else, like, I saw it. It really worked. These kids enjoyed it.
It could happen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and I mentioned it on our last interview, and there's definitely a trend going from learning in the classroom to how do you apply that learning, and it seems like your district's doing that as well. It's not all the district. There seems like it's a few districts that are doing it, but the ones that are doing it seem to be some of the top performers, at least based on what we're hearing. You know, so yeah, and it makes sense from a learning standpoint too. I mean, I know me, when I remember once summer hit, I forgot everything that I learned that year. And then the next year, but if you're learning how to apply it, then you see it in the world and you're like, okay, yeah, that's how physics, works with, whatever it is, or you just go do things yourself, applying it in different ways. That's very cool. And you mentioned autonomy. That's very interesting as well. Like being able to learn. I don't know if learning at your own pace is the right way to say it, but basically if you're because I know there's a big focus in general, right, on equity gaps, right? There's a big focus on equity, and it seems like, and I'm not an expert on this, obviously, it's all about catching up, getting people to catch up to, to make sure there's no gaps, right? They're catching up to the other students, but the ability to not only, some students don't need to be caught up. Some students need to go to the next level, or they have that ability to go to the next level. And it seems like having the ability to focus on critical thinking and and that and that autonomous learning, you could, maybe they're only in first grade, but maybe they're on a fifth grade level just because of, they're gifted for whatever reason, right?
Right.
So the having that ability to, to just max out, right? For lack of
Yeah.
better words. So
Well, and we have to make the conscious decision to take something off the plate for teachers as well, because we've got, if we're talking about teaching coding, well, they didn't teach coding when I was in school. There were a lot of things they didn't teach when I was in school. So we can't look at our curriculum the same way we've always looked at it, in terms of you have to have, a full hour of science, full hour of social studies, full 90 minutes of English, or whatever that is, because we've got to embed some of these other skills and knowledges in there. And so we've got to figure out what can come off the plate so that we can enable our teachers to really cover these important skills and knowledge, and create these mindsets for learning.
absolutely.
That's beautiful. I think otherwise we're not honoring their work as educators to just put more on their plate. So I appreciate that you said we've got to take something off their plate so they can do this. That's beautiful. Sounds like you are an amazing superintendent. I was on the school board for a very long time, and I think the superintendents who are cognizant about the load in the life of a teacher, those are the best superintendents. And so
It's never been a harder job than it is today, especially not only in the classroom, but all the things that teachers have to deal with outside of the classroom, making it a very stressful and tough job. So I applaud every single person who volunteers to get in that classroom and work with kids. They're changing lives every single day, and our nation and our states don't appreciate them as much as they should.
Absolutely. It's a tough job, and we really do appreciate, everything that you all are doing, right? So that's what we're doing. We're sharing all the amazing things that are happening. So I appreciate you sharing what's happening at your district today. Now I have a final question. I know we're running short on time.
Okay.
This is the most difficult question, so hope you're ready. Uh,
I'm ready.
so if you were to recommend another superintendent to come on the podcast and share their story and what's happening at their district, anybody out there that maybe inspires you a little bit, or you think probably we should get the word out on what they're doing?
Uh, sure. Have you talked with Dr. Kurt Hartzler at Union Public Schools yet?
We did. That was our last interview. Absolutely.
Oh, well, so he recommended me. So he's retiring at the end of this year, and they do some pretty incredible things. So I would Rick Cobb, Dr. Rick Cobb at Middell. That's MID-DEL Public Schools.
Okay.
He's been a superintendent for about 8 or 9 years, I believe, down there. It's a large school district of about 18,000 students. He deals with a wide range because they get multiple high schools. They have a military base there. So he has a lot of different perspectives on managing that school district. He's also, he and I both were bloggers back in the day, about a decade ago, and were education bloggers in the state of Oklahoma when we had a state superintendent who was not in support of public education. We have another one that's that you could argue is not real supportive of public education. But so he and I have written and cooperated on a lot of stuff together. But he is a very bright guy and would be a great podcast for you.
We will reach him. Thanks for that.
Okay, you bet.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we will go ahead and close out. And so thank you for joining us today. And for those of well, actually, before we close out, I do have to give one final shout out to our sponsor. So IDEAL Impact, giving hundreds of millions of dollars away to public education. If your district needs additional funding, unrestricted funds, reach out to IDEAL Impact. Corinne, Superintendent Miller, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And for those that have been tuning in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.